Good evening and welcome back to this week's episode of Since I Was Young, a podcast dedicated to all things Heart of Midlothian. This week, myself and Ewan have taken a somewhat of a divide and conquer approach to the podcast this week in terms of our thoughts and reactions to the disappointment of the Fir Park result that took place on Saturday lunchtime, where we had it once again in our hands to secure top six football, not for the first time this season, had our own fate in our own hands, and we failed to deliver with a 0-0 draw at Motherwell. And obviously St Mirren's victory catapulted them into the top six and, of course, put us into the bottom six. My thoughts will be focused kind of on the game itself, and then my thoughts in terms of, because obviously there's been a lot of backlash on the management and the system and the shape and the club as a whole. I don't feel like there's been enough criticism of the players themselves, however, and I feel like that is something that needs to be highlighted, and that's kind of where my focus will be. I'm sure Ewan will go in a different direction, as he is entitled to do so, but obviously if you have any thoughts to add or any comments to make, please do so in the description below. You can find all of our social media links down there, as well as obviously while you're there, please do consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. It would be massively appreciated. But to get jumped in, obviously, as I say, we took on Motherwell at Fir Park in a game that we had billed as a huge game. We've billed a few games as huge games recently, and we've failed to deliver. And once again, the team failed to deliver on the weekend at Fir Park. Where to begin? I think, like I said, there's been a lot of backlash on the management due to the system chosen. And of course, Neil Critchley opted to go with the diamond once again. This time, however, he played George Grant at the tip of the diamond. He had Beningame, Spittle, and Khartoum starting in the other positions within the midfield. Obviously, Spittle on the left, Khartoum on the right, and Benny, that sitting midfielder. And he went with Kabangu and Musa Drama up front as a two, Shankland on the bench, and obviously James Wilson suspended. So there was a little bit of a reshuffle, a little bit of a change of personnel in there. But obviously, the diamond formation is something that has been criticised by a lot of people, and it's something that we spoke about on, I'm not sure if it was last week's episode or a previous one, but it may well have been John in last week's episode now that I think about it. The diamond formation doesn't work for what we have at the moment to play within it, and it worked very briefly when Cammy Devlin was injured. However, Cammy is back, so I don't really see the need for it anymore. We have enough midfielders to play a 4-2-3-1 like we had previously played, or even that 4-3-3 that Critchley seemed to play previously as well. We have seen him deploy a few systems, so hopefully the diamond is one that is consigned to the bin off the back of a really disappointing day in Motherwell. The game itself, I have to be honest, there's not really a lot that I want to talk about in terms of the game, minute by minute. I felt it was a very poor game of football. I felt like it was a game of football contested by two sides that looked as if they had nothing left to play for, when, as a matter of fact, the complete opposite was true. But you wouldn't have been able to tell that on the day itself. Just typical Hearts at the moment. Not really a lot of drive in us, not really a lot of energy, which is obviously something that is not good enough. But yeah, like I said at the start, myself and Ewan are going to be kind of dividing and conquering this week's episode. I'm going to give my thoughts on certain things, and he will give his thoughts on others. I feel like, obviously the pressure is on Neil Critchley, and I totally understand that. I get where people come from when they talk about the pressures on him, and I've seen lots of people call for him to be sacked already, and many others calling for him to go after the semi-final. If we should be humiliated in that game against Aberdeen at Hampden, there's obviously cries for him to go before that, after that. So time will tell. And I think, my view on Neil Critchley is differing to what you'll hear from Ewan. But I can respect and understand reasons as to why people believe what they believe, and what they say is what they say. I'm not going to dive too deeply onto Neil Critchley because I've posted all my thoughts on social medias. So if you want to hear my thoughts, if you want to have a conversation with me, please feel free to find me on Twitter. My link is in the description below as well. Not that I'm plugging it or anything, but if you want to have a nice, mature, grown-up conversation, you can find me over there. If you want to be a troll and you want to hurl personal abuse at me, that will not be tolerated. But it is what it is. The social media world is a very interesting place at times when you have a difference of opinion from somebody else. But yeah, as I said, I'm not going to completely remove the blame from Neil Critchley. I feel like there are things that he has done during his tenure that haven't worked, or things that he's done that could have been better. And I think, as I say, Ewan will probably touch on a few more of those rather than myself. But one thing I haven't seen, and one thing I want to highlight, and my kind of main thing to highlight, I look at the players at Hearts at the moment, and the problem I have, we have a captain who has not turned up for months, to be honest. And I had a rather passionate rant about Lawrence Shankland a few weeks ago now, on this podcast, where I kind of spoke about him and felt as if he's not showing, captain. Yeah, he's not showing a captain's mentality. He's not showing the leadership that you feel a captain should. And I think, for Neil Critchley we've obviously recently signed, or recently announced the signing of a new right back for next season. And one of the key points that was made during his, the sort of press releases and stuff, was his leadership qualities, and the fact that he is the current captain of Norwegian side Valerenga. It kind of shows that Neil Critchley feels maybe there isn't enough leadership in this team at the moment, and that is something that will obviously hopefully be highlighted as the summer window progresses. Um, but yeah, this episode might, in my part, may well come across as a bit of a kind of ad hoc rant, and I'll be honest with you, it kind of is. I took a couple of days to kind of process everything that happened after the Motherwell game, and obviously the confirmation of bottom six. We've had our fixtures released today, if anybody cares. Um, and yeah, look, I think, I'll go back to what I was going to talk about, the players' side of things. I think having a captain that, through no fault of his own, has had a season to forget. He went to the Euros in the summer, didn't really play as much as I feel like he probably thought he would. Then he's come back, and obviously there's been all the media speculation from the Glaswegian rags about him going along the M8, joining Rangers. His agents have had an impact on that without question. They'll have seen the pound signs in their eyes and tried to kind of push that. Was there any truth in it? Everybody in the Hearts camp has said there was never any interest. There's not been any offers. So, he's not going anywhere. Then there was the contract stuff with Hearts that's obviously gone quiet again. You know, it's been a season to forget for Lawrence Shankland. And I just feel like Neil Critchley could have taken the decision to take the captaincy away from him at a point when he felt like, you know what, your head's not in it, you're not with it. That's what I would have done if I were the new manager of Hearts. But then you look around that dressing room and wonder, who do you give it to? That's a question I want to pose to you, you lot ahead of next season. Um, if out of the current crop of players, if any of them are left, who do you give the captaincy to? That's an interesting point to make there. But I do feel like there have been games this season where Neil Critchley has set us up in a way, and we've created chances, we just haven't been scoring, and that is the biggest issue. Obviously, you don't win football games if you don't score goals, and when you have a striker who has hit 20 plus goals 2 seasons in a row, and this season he can barely hit a barn door, you're going to struggle. Kabangu came in January, had a good start to his time at Hearts, and has been probably one of the success stories of January, if you could call it that. But the January recruits in general, aside from maybe Jamie McCart, haven't really shown enough for me to say, yeah, do you know what, you're going to be a player that I can see sticking with long term. I think Kabangu is somebody that I'd look at and go, he deserves a chance in the summer. He deserves to come back next year. It could well be the number 9 next year. Who knows? But I just feel like there's a lot of players at Hearts that have switched off, and I think I'll give you my reasons as to why I think that. Personally, and this is maybe too simple thinking, but I feel like a lot of the club kind of press and media over this season has been about this new recruitment model. It's been about Graham Jones coming in. It's been about Shelley Kerr coming in and working in the academy. It's been about the Jamestown stuff and the new recruitment analysis and all that. Now, if I'm a player in the dressing room and I'm looking at these headlines and thinking the club's just invested in this state of the art recruitment system, so my days are numbered. That's if you're an average player sitting in the dressing room, you're thinking, well, they're going to find somebody better than me. So what's the point? The mentality in that dressing room is massive, and I don't feel like they're switched on enough. I don't feel like they're focused enough, and I feel like we have at points this season had our own fate in our own hands, and we failed time and time again to capitalize on that. We went on a little run where we started climbing up the table. We touched the top six. We were in the top six, and then we've fallen back down again. And you start going, okay, we're not far off because the league this season has been quite tight in terms of that middle pack, and I think that was always kind of the thought was if we can get into that middle pack and we can build and we can go again, and we just never touched it. We never got near it. We never got high enough to think, right, do you know what, this is us secure in top six. And our record against top six sides, again, John and I spoke about it last week, has not been good enough all season long. And if you're not taking enough points, I think it was like 9 out of a possible 30 against the top six sides. I could even be wrong. That might even be too much. Um, that's not acceptable. We myself and John spoke about it last week, and John made the perfect point of Heart of Midlothian Football Club, and these players will finish the season wherever they deserve to finish the season, and it's so accurate, and never a truer word has been said. We don't deserve top six, and I do understand the pressure on Neil Critchley, and I'm not sitting here as a happy clapper claiming that Neil Critchley should be given a new contract. I think he is on a, I'm very much I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and if people want to say that's a loser's mentality, feel free to come at me. But my point is, Rome wasn't built in a day. This football club is in the middle of, or not even in the middle of. This football club is in the process of a transitional period, and sometimes you do need to take a step back and take a deep breath and understand that. Short-term pain for long-term gain is again another cliche that I'll throw out there. But yeah, I just feel like a lot of the players are probably looking at it going, my days at this club are numbered. I don't really want to be here anymore. So what's the point? We've got players sitting in the stands that are earning big money. Barry Mackay is still employed by the football club, and decisions like that are decisions that come the summer. Obviously, a lot of players' contracts are up, and I personally, and I said this a couple of nights ago when I was talking to a friend. Personally, there is not many players in the Heart of Midlothian first team at the moment that I would miss if they left, and that just shows the sort of size of the job at hand for the people at the football club. And you can have your thoughts on the people in the recruitment side and the board level side. This is a huge summer for them. This is a huge summer for them, and I think this is kind of the only point I'll make on Critchley. This is a massive summer for the recruitment team. I don't think that they will sack a manager off the back of finishing bottom six and at worst a semi-final exit of the Scottish Cup. Neil Critchley was brought in at a time we were bottom of the table, and whether we like to admit it or not, his first target would have been to get us out of trouble. He's done that because, as bad as things are, I don't see relegation as a possibility. But you know, he has achieved that first target, you would say. I know it's not mathematically achieved yet, so there's maybe that as well. But the club needs a massive, massive overhaul in playing staff, and that is something that is massive. It's a huge, huge undertaking this summer, and it's going to be busy. I don't think any players are safe. To be honest, there's probably one or two, but I don't. Like I said it just a moment ago, I wouldn't miss any of them if they left. But yeah, I feel like, and I posted this on social medias, and it's kind of the last thing I'll say before I hand it over to you. And I was somewhat defending Neil Critchley by suggesting that, he's come in and been asked to build something with us. What he's been given are blunt tools and one hand tied behind his back. He's spent money in January on players that haven't really had that big an impact yet. I think Steinbender looks promising. I think Kabangu has obviously made an impact with his goals, but he's also had a lot of chances that he's failed to put away, which kind of goes back to the crux of the problem I was talking about with Shankland. If you've got strikers not scoring, it doesn't matter how many chances you create in a game. You could look back at games that we've played this season and look at the stats and see how many chances we've created, but we've lost the games, and that's what it boils down to. Even the game last week against Dundee United, before James Wilson gets sent off, we have three clear-cut chances that you have to put one or two of them away. We fail to do that, and then the game changes on a red card. We've had games this season where there have been flashes of what Critchley wants to do, but we've just failed at the simple things. And I remember when Critchley came into the club, he spoke about, you need to be better in both boxes. You need to be better at keeping the ball out at one end and putting it in at the other. Are we much better than we were when he first arrived at that? That's open for debate. I am one of these people. I'm very much on the fence about Critchley at the moment, and I can see the arguments of both sides, and I totally understand it. I'm not going to come down one side or the other until I see what the club does in the summer. And again, you'll get people that will reply to this and say, we're going to waste money on a manager that's out of his depth, not good enough, etc., etc. It's the gamble that you take. You don't want to keep chopping and changing and replacing managers every 6 months, because then it becomes a football club that nobody's going to want to work at, you know. So there's that aspect as well. But like I say, there's too many players that have got comfortable, I feel like, at Hearts, and players that are simply not good enough to be here anymore, for where we want to be, and it's sad because some of those players have put in a good shift and have done very well for us during their time at Hearts, but they've come to the end of their almost their end of life at Hearts, if you will. And I feel like I said, this summer is massive. A big clean slate is required. A proper preseason campaign where we don't just go on a holiday to Spain and learn what each other's favourite colours are, and we actually put in some work and fitness and play some games in preseason. That would be helpful. Neil Critchley questioned the fitness of the players when he first arrived at the football club. So to sum up, and before I hand it on to you, and I think, I've not really spoken much about the Motherwell game because there's not really a lot to talk about from it, but the backlash and the aftermath is what people want to talk about and what people want to discuss, and that's what all the discussion points have been around. Should Neil Critchley be sacked? Is he lucky to still be in the job? There was Sky Sports, I'm sure it was Sutton and Chris Boyd were going back and forward on it, which is fair. That's what they do. And I'm very much in that camp of give him a summer. Give him a summer, give him a summer with the new recruitment model, see what the club can do, and then judge it after that. That's where my head is at. But yeah, as I say, this has been somewhat of a rant or an ad hoc conversation, and I've kind of thrown a few points out there. But please do let us know your thoughts in the comments below on anything I've spoken about, and let's try and generate some conversation. Are you a Critchley in or a Critchley out? What do you think? How long are you willing to give him? And should he get the semi final? Obviously, this episode may well go out in midweek, and we play Aberdeen on the weekend. A nice trip to Hampden in an otherwise very, very disappointing season. We'll see what happens at Hampden. Listen, I'm not. I spoke to myself and John, gave our predictions for the Motherwell game, and I was not. I didn't have any faith in this team to get a result. At Hampden, I have no idea. I genuinely don't know how it's going to go. I think on paper, we are massively, massively underdogs. I can't deny that because of the two clubs' form, and where we are and where Aberdeen are. But stranger things have happened. Stranger things have happened. We could still find ourselves in a Scottish Cup final, and that would be the most bizarre ending to what has been the most underwhelming season for a very, very long time. But yes, I'm going to hand it over to you now. But please do feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments below about anything I've discussed. And yeah, try and enjoy the semi final if you can. It'll be an interesting afternoon, a nice trip through to Hampden. I'm going to give my sort of semi-final preview, if you will, on the social media channels later in the week. Just due to timing, this is the way we've had to kind of work this episode this week. But I'm going to hand it across to Ewan now, and he will give you his thoughts. Take care.
Thank you very much, Alan. Yes, it has been another disappointing week for Hartman Lovian. Just to echo Alan as well, obviously him coming off the back of a very disappointing and flat 0-0 draw against Motherwell away, which obviously we've been saying it every single week for the last few months, I would say, but it was a massive game, and we just weren't able to make anything happen at all. That equally comes down to both the squad that was on the park and the manager as well to some degree. But after the result, just with the overall theme of the whole season, I kind of expected it, hence why I wasn't too um disappointed about it. If I'm being very honest, I'm sure that most of you will feel that way as well, just with the current, you know, circumstances and the atmosphere around Tynecastle at this moment in time. It's not that good, like to put it very simply. Yeah, I kind of expecting it personally. After the result, um, if we did manage to win, then you know, great, but it still wouldn't have turned around what has been a very disappointing season. Just to echo Alan on what he was saying in terms of where we're at just now, in terms of our head coach Neil Critchley. I've made it no secret personally that I still don't get a vibe from Ed the Critchley in context being the man to take us forward and to kind of take us to that next step on where we want to be as a club. Like, we've, at the board especially have talked about in recent years about trying to, take that next step to try and, things like trying to challenge the old firm next like sort of like in the next few years, being consistently part of European football, you know, trying to be that more kind of a selling club as well, trying to bring youngsters through to then develop them and so on and so forth. Um, but you know, obviously you've got to have that consistency as well, and I think that's, if I'm being very honest, that's been the common denominator throughout the last 10 years. I think everything that we've done off the park, the majority of it has been good, has been great, you know. But in terms of on the field, it's been just so inconsistent in terms of one season we'll play fantastically well, make third, do relatively okay in the group stages of the Conference League, and then the next again season it should fall short or flat, and then the next season on we'll do relatively okay, and then the same set of circumstances will just happen again. Um, but coming back to Critchley, as I said, I've not been a massive fan of him since he came into the club. I've said on a few podcasts that my overall feel towards him personally, just from what he's shown in terms of interviews, pre and then the post match interviews, it just feels like there's nothing there. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't feel as if there's that kind of connection that you learn if you're at Heart of Midlothian. And again, what I mean by that is knowing when you're there, that, like, if you're there as a head coach, as any member of staff or a player, you know what it takes to play for this club. And us as supporters as well, we know what it takes and what you should like. I mean, I don't want to say what you should feel, but you should know what it's like to come to a club like this. And you know even with just the post-match interview after the Motherwell game, it just felt, you know much like the game itself. It was just flat. And I'm not asking him but to be more sort of energetic, more animated, etc. But just like have a bit of a feeling in there, like, and this is where like I kind of fall short in terms of Ed Critchley being the man to take us to that next step. And to point what Alan was saying as well, about being on the fence with Critchley. I agree with what he says from his point of view, and yeah, I'm maybe in I'm maybe more in that camp of I don't particularly want Ed the Critchley here, but at the same time, for any managers to go into any football club during a season when he's not had, you know, time to prep at the pre-season, brought in the other players he wants in, it's not entirely fair to judge him on the season that we've had, especially when he walked into a complete mess and us sitting at at the bottom of the table now. Yes, granted, he's not achieved what I would assume that he was set out to actually do to get us into the top six at least. Now, I know that sounds a bit hypocritical when I just said that I don't particularly want Critchley to lead us to hopefully what will be that next step, but you have to give a manager a full summer to show if he can or not. And, you know, as Alan said as well, like, there is the gamble of like if you want to back a guy who a lot of the fan base thinks that he's not the one to take us forward. Yeah, I do agree with Alan. That is the the risk that you actually take, and for all as much as he's not set out what we would all hope he would do would be to at least make top six. you know, he is due that though. Not like he is due the time to have a full summer to the regroup, to get the players in he wants to bring in, obviously with the help of Jamestown as well. Get rid of all the deadwood that is in that squad right now. A lot of players are still there from the likes of 2, 3 seasons ago who obviously served their time at the club, and yeah, that is through they're actually not particularly fancying them, or they're just not was it the good enough anymore, or this or that. But there is a lot of deadwood in that squad, which obviously has to go. And I know that most fans kind of say this when they've had an awful season where, oh yeah, they've got to rebuild the whole squad and this and that and this and that. In general, we've got a relatively good squad, but at the same time, it's just not glued or gelled as well as we all thought. When was it even before we had to kick the ball at the start of the season? I thought on paper we had a really strong squad. I thought when we got into the start of the season and the group stages, the group, I should now say, of the Conference League, I thought in both we would generally do quite well. And yeah, we've got to another semi final of the Scottish Cup, but again, like just the way that we have been for the last few months and tactically how we are, how sloppy the squad is looking, not putting clear cut chances away. It's kind of all up in the air at this moment in time. But as Alan said, it would be interesting to hear all your thoughts in terms of if you think Critchley is the man to take us forward, and what you would like to see when we get into the start of the new season in terms of if you didn't want Ed the Critchley, who would you want? What players you want to stay or go, etc., like that. So it would be really interesting to hear that as well. Um, Going into the semi-final, well, that's it's going to be an interesting one. You know, I'm not saying that if we win the Scottish Cup that it would save our season, but um, the only reason that I say that is that for all as much as it sounds really negative, I don't have any faith that we're going to get that far. You know, just based on what I saw at the weekend and the last few months, the inconsistency, how we've been playing, how we've been setting up, you know, it's going to be a big, tall ask, even just to get through to the final. We go into this as, just to quote Alan, as the underdogs. I think Aberdeen will be a bit more confident going into this tie. Obviously, they're going to have a pretty much sold out Hampden as well. Like, especially from our end, it's our last ditch at getting something out of the season. So it's going to be a tall ask, but you know, stranger things have happened in football. So if we manage to get to a cup final, then I'll be flabbergasted if we do it. But obviously, I do hope we do. But again, I'm only just basing it on what we've seen through the last wee bit on the field. But again, as Alan said, for everyone that's going to Hampden, regardless of the result, we do hope you have a grand day out as well. And obviously, when we come back for the next podcast, we'll talk about as the split fixtures, etc. Not that there's anything to come out of it, but we will try and make it as interactive as possible and as in the gauging as impossible as we can do for you guys. So thank you very much for watching as well. I know again this has been a bit of a different podcast as well, but regardless, thank you very much. And again, if you want to check us out on any of our socials as well, please feel free to do so. All will be in the description. And if you want to listen to any of our past podcasts as well, you can find us on YouTube and Spotify, also will be in the description. So once again, for all those who are going to the semi-final, I do hope you have a great day out, and we'll see you in the next one. You all take care. Bye for now.